And I want to say I really admire this group because you guys have a commitment to walk your talk, and you've taken action instead of just talking about things. And I really admire that. I think you guys have accomplished more good than a lot of groups 5, 10 times as big. And so appreciate the chance to be here and share with you guys. So in my background, just briefly, I'm a retired scientist engineer, and I worked on lasers and coherent optics and some things like that. And I had my own little company for a while building scientific instruments. And then I've been involved with a number of activist projects. And I managed to get arrested in Colorado Springs at the start of the Gulf War and some things like that. So, along with a lot of you guys, which have done even more than me. But what I want to talk about tonight is starting out with a story of Carlos Zorrilla, who has been fighting a battle to prevent mining in his region of Ecuador. And there's a lot of parallels with what you guys are working on in Peru. A lot of parallels. And I also want to describe the guidebook that came out of his and my collaboration, and what's been happening because of the guidebook, and plans for a new expanded book that I'm hoping that maybe the DJPC can be involved and help with that. So please feel free to just stop anytime with questions. So the story starts with Carlos, who in the 80s settled in a remote cloud forest region of Ecuador, the Intog Valley, and he started sustainable farming there. And cloud forests, as you probably know, are a lot more rare than rainforests. There's not much cloud forest in the world, and it has enormous biodiversity. A lot of species of hummingbirds there, 200 orchid varieties, dozens of endangered species, including moths as big as your palm, and something called a spectacled bear, very rare kind of bear, and a lot of others. So Carlos taught locals how to value the forest just as it was, without slash and burning and cutting it down for gardening. And he got him away from those practices. And then he found out that poachers were going into the area and killing the bears and selling the bear body parts to the Chinese for medicine. So what Carlos did was he organized the teen soccer club to patrol the forest and watch out for the poachers. And he publicized this group, which he called the Green Patrol, on television. And that stopped the poaching. It worked. So then mining reared its ugly head. And in 1994, a division of the multinational Mitsubishi decided they wanted to go mining for copper in this area. They started prospecting. And as you know, copper mining is typically open pit, and it's gigantic deep holes that just destroy the whole area. A lot worse than mountaintop removal, as far as I can tell. Conflicts sprung up. Communities started arguing whether they wanted mining or didn't want mining, and so Carlos, what he did was organize farmers and peasants and a local priest into a grassroots group called De-Coin. And Carlos put a lot of it, DECOIN, and it stands for a long name that I don't even remember, but it's called De-Coin. And they started out finding different ways to counter the mining approach. They put together alternatives, economic alternatives, so the villagers wouldn't be, swayed by promises of quick money. One thing they did, which is very successful, is they started a shade-grown organic coffee business, which now is marketed worldwide. Very successful. And a number of handmade products. He started an ecotourism business, and so they got that going. And they used a variety of other tactics, both conventional and unconventional. With villages that were conflicted over mining, they arranged to take the leaders on visits to other villages that had mining to find out what the impact really was, to show them. And that was really powerful. And they organized local, regional, and national protests. They waged a very aggressive media campaign. They pursued political activism locally and nationally. And Carlos even went to Europe and appealed to the EU about this whole thing. They also staged a monkey wrench operation. At one point, 500 men, women, and children trekked through the mountains on burros for 10 hours all day long to an empty prospecting camp that had been abandoned for the season. And it was a collection of wood shacks, basically. They took out all the equipment and inventoried it, dismantled part of the camp, and burned the rest of the camp down, and delivered the equipment to the company. This didn't make them any friends, but it had an impact. And this struggle went on for years, about 4 years. And finally, in the face of unremitting local opposition and international support, which Carlos revved up along the way, Mitsubishi decided to cut its losses and move on to easier pickings. And they packed up and left. So Carlos had won. A few years later, a Canadian company, Ascendant Copper, took over the leases, and Carlos and De-Fanging had to do it all over again. The new company used more aggressive tactics. There was more violence, there was more tricks and games played by the company, and Carlos had their work cut out for them. The new company set up their own community association parallel to De-Fanging, but pro-mining, just to split the communities back and forth. And this company organization, by the way, was directed by a man who ended up being suspected of being an ex-drug mobster. And currently, some years later, he's on the run and he's on Interpol's most wanted list internationally. So there were death threats and intimidations, clashes between pro and anti-mining groups. And again, in 2005, a work camp was burned down. And this time, 300 people, local people, agreed to take responsibility for that. So there's nothing they could do against 300 people. Kind of similar to what the Danes did during World War II, when you probably know the story, when the Jews were required to wear signs. So everybody in Denmark put on the same thing. So there were attempts to get Carlos arrested, put in jail, otherwise gotten out of the way. One time they planted guns and narcotics in his house and then took him to court for illegal possession. The local prosecutor decided he wasn't going to prosecute him. He refused. Another time, paramilitaries headed for his house, intending to do him in. And 5 minutes before they got there, some neighbors ran in and warned him. Carlos grabbed a tent and some food and disappeared into the jungle. and he stayed there for a couple of weeks until it blew over.
I have one question. Is it common for, when you said Mitsubishi went in there, is it common for somebody besides a mining company to have mining leases? Or do they do something
Well,
besides
Mitsubishi
used
had
cars?
a division that it was a mining division.
Oh, okay.
So this
And
is
they
just
still
something.
have it or not?
I don't know if they still have it, but there's something that Mitsubishi owned, but it was.
So it was a mining thing?
Yeah,
just
right,
okay.
right.
Thank you.
So, and Carlos wasn't the only target. At one point, a group of 30 people, led by mining employees, tried to lynch a local opposition leader. And at the last minute, he managed to escape. Another time, masked gunmen entered a house where a group of environmentalists were having a meeting, tied them all up, stole all their equipment. In December of 2006, 15 armed security guards attacked opponents of the mine with tear gas and guns, and they got more than they bargained for. The locals, after being chased away, regrouped and went back and took the guards hostage, together with some others who were building a camp. And they held them for 6 days in the forest. And finally, the National Department of Energy asked the mining company to just stop their activity in that area. And they released the guards, and it was over. But Carlos got their attention. So De-Coin went to Canada and held demonstrations at Ascendant Copper's shareholders meetings. Carlos even pulled off a major coup, and I don't know the details of how he managed to pull this off.
How do you say Ascendant?
Yeah, Ascendant, Ascendant. He managed to get Ascendant Copper delisted from the Toronto Stock Exchange, which was major. And again, all these tactics worked. And by the end of 2006, they had completely stalled the plans to go ahead with the mine. So after years of effort, Carlos and his people again won, for the time being. But the copper is still in the ground. So a year after that, Carlos was in Denver getting an award for all this work. And a few of us had dinner with him. And during the dinner, we asked Carlos, well, what can we do up here to help other communities who are being attacked by mining companies like this? And he had an immediate answer. He said, well, you all can write a how-to guide for communities, and just telling all the tricks that the companies pull and how to get around them.
Which group was giving him the award?
What's that?
Which group was giving Carlos the award?
I don't remember what that was. I don't remember. I just barely knew what was going on at that point until I met him.
That'd be good to know. They were
Yeah.
If they're still
Solidarity.
existing or whatever.
Well, I have to ask him next time I email him.
because we know them.
So the guidebook, so we did it, and I worked with Carlos. Carlos, of course, had all the good ideas and all the strategies and tactics. I organized them into a coherent form, into a book. Paula Palmer contributed. She contributed a couple parts. And a colleague at the University of Minnesota, David Pello, contributed a resources section. So we did it. We put the book together. And the book describes in detail how organizers, activists, and residents can work to protect themselves from assaults by these extraction companies. Not only mining, but oil and gas and others too. And the book is written not for the regular villagers who may not even speak Spanish, let alone English, but it's written for organizers who might be the village leader, but who can then use the book and organize the whole thing, and also go to the Capitol and do other things. So we did this, and we published hard copies, and we also put it on the internet. And it's been fantastically successful. Turns out there's nothing else like that out there. And so this had quite an impact. It's been translated into other languages. It's been used in Latin America, Canada, the US, Eastern Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, and other places too. And as far as looking at the website where it's at, it's been downloaded, it looks like tens of thousands of times. So it's really out there. I'll just briefly go through the contents of it. And I'll have a few copies to look at back there. But it describes mining, what mining's about, typical steps in the process, the impacts of mining, the environmental impacts, health impacts, social impacts, the fragmentations of communities because of it, and so forth. And then it gets into a section called How to Fight Back, and it's stuff that you all are somewhat familiar with. There's a lot of standard things, like prepare, do research, know your enemy, build up local opposition, inform the community, have a real educational program, use local media, work with a local government, get funding, because it's going to take funding to do all this, and then form alliances, starting with local alliances and quickly expanding to regional, national, and international alliances. Get folks like Amnesty International and so forth involved. And then another part says use the law and political process. Use lawsuits, injunctions, referendums, voting. And Carlos did all that. Another one is obstruct the process. And part of that is purchase critical land that you know the mines are going to need to get access. Another is challenge and delay all the different approval steps that the mining companies need to go through. Slow that down as much as possible. And then create economic alternatives to mining. And then it goes on to talk about publicity, spreading the word, using the media, which we all know about. Organize globally. Campaign in the country of origin, like at shareholders meetings and other ways. Go to human rights groups, environmental groups, international observers. Buy shares in the mining company and get contact with other investors. Do letter writing campaigns. Direct action, like the mining, burning down the mining camps. And he has a lot of warnings about that, saying make sure that it doesn't backfire, because if it gets you demonized, it's not helping. And make sure you have good legal support and good legal grounds when you do it. And make sure it's nonviolent and it doesn't damage anything of permanent value. And then a section on if mining goes forward, what to do then. And then part 3 is the one that the mining companies were furious at. They hated this because what they do is they have these scams and promises and lies that they can go from village to village, country to country, and do the same thing over and over. And they've got unsuspecting people each time. This lays it out. This is called company tactics and community countermeasures. So once they get this guide, they're forewarned. And the company now has to think up new tactics. So there's a variety of these. I won't list them all, but
Did he have legal support in Ecuador also?
what's that?
Did he have legal support in Ecuador? You said get lawyers.
Yeah, he
thinking-
knew some lawyers in Quito, and he didn't have to do a lot with them. Well, actually, he did. He filed a lawsuit against the first company. So yeah, he was legally active. A lot of promises that the companies make and never follow through. We're going to build you new roads, new schools. You're going to have a lot of money and so forth. And some of it they go through with. Sometimes there is some money for a year or so, but that's the end of it. So then there's some case histories in this, a list of resources, and a bunch of pictures showing the devastation caused by mining. So that's what the manual is. So Carlos and I have talked about writing a greatly expanded new edition of the manual. He's learned a lot more about government and company tactics since the first one was done, and he's obtained leaked documents that reveal details of those tactics, what goes on behind the scenes of the transnationals. Also, some original material in this guide is now getting outdated. So Carlos thinks the new guidebook will be a knockout. So David Pello and I and Carlos are getting geared up to start work on this. So when this is done, hopefully later this year, I'm hoping that after all that's done and is distributed, I'd like to see us do a similar guidebook for oil and gas and fracking. And I think a lot of the material would be the same, and all we'd have to change is the process and pictures and things like that, but be a lot of similarity. So,
But the book it's manuals in Spanish and English.
it's in Spanish and English and an Indonesian language too, yeah. And there may be some others that we don't know about. So the new manual is what I would maybe appeal to this group for some help with. So now there's new trouble. Last year, the president, Correa, started pushing mining, and Carlos and his group are now fighting the battle all over again. So Ecuador's constitution is perhaps the most progressive in the world. It even extends legal standing to ecosystems, which is really great, but at the same time, the country is facing a huge foreign debt, and Rafael Correa, the new president, sees industrial mining as the way to pay it off. The World Bank also wants to open up the whole country to mining, as well as other parts of South America, to get their loans paid off. So Carlos is now going up not only against mining companies, but also against the government and against the World Bank. And Correa is an interesting fellow. He's young, energetic. There's two sides to him. In a lot of ways, he's a really good leader, and he's environmentally and socially progressive, at least on the surface. Carlos doesn't buy that as much as the media does, I think. But he has reduced poverty and unemployment since he's been in office for a few years. And he put out the proposal to leave Amazon oil in the ground if the international community could come up with what it was worth, which was $1/3 trillion. The international community didn't come up with it, and so that is off the table. On the other hand, he's accused of being authoritarian, attacking dissidents, illegally shutting down NGOs that don't agree with him. And now it turns out that while he was proposing to leave the Amazon oil in the ground, he was quietly negotiating a deal with China to take out that oil at the same time. So this huge foreign debt is Correa's reason for to push mining. And he's made it clear that when it comes to the use of money-producing resources, no community, especially indigenous communities, can demand autonomy or refuse to consent to have their land invaded for mining. Well, Carlos found out that the government intelligence group was investigating him looking for some excuse to arrest him and get him out of the way. And at one point, 4 policemen came to his house looking for him, but he was gone. And he hid out with friends for a few weeks. And last December, we got our 15 minutes of fame. Carlos and me and others. The president gave a national TV address, his standard address. And during that address, he spent a long time waving this book on camera, saying, "These people are trying to interrupt our progress," and just going through some pages telling how bad we were, and even added some other pages that weren't in the book just to, hype up his his argument there. So that was pretty interesting to see myself named on on Ecuadorian television. Also, about the same time, this was in December, at the same time Korea shut down a group called Pachamama down there because they were holding a march against extraction in the Amazon. He just closed them up completely illegally. So all this started looking serious, and we're thinking it could have consequences for Carlos and his family. Carlos is 62. He's recently remarried, and they have a young baby. And so when I heard about all of this stuff happening, I called a friend in Netherlands, up here in Netherlands, who, with her husband, ran Amnesty International's urgent response headquarters out of Netherlands, out of their house. And she alerted AI, and they put out an international action, which is basically a letter campaign to the president. And that seemed to help. Things calmed down, and Carlos felt he was safe now. Well, interesting thing, being attacked by the president of your country and designated, which he did, designated an enemy of the state, is not one's idea of a good time. And the normal response would be to hunker down and lie low for a while. Carlos, though, swung into action immediately with an editorial in the main Quito newspaper rebutting the president, and then he held an encuentro. And I meant to hang around this picture of the president holding up copies. So he held an encuentro in downtown Quito, and encuentro is basically just a public event. And so he had food, he had music, he had speeches, and he gave away 320 copies of the book that the president attacked. So, and here's some pictures of the. Oh, and here's a picture of Carlos with his family.
Aren't there environmental groups that would speak to what mining does too?
Oh yeah, and Carlos is connected with them and working with them. And Carlos, in a matter of just a few weeks, put together this whole a poster and all the things. He managed to get the local Catholic cathedral, the main cathedral in Ecuador, I guess, to turn over the church to him during the encuentro. And
Was he educated in
What?
Ecuador?
What?
Was he educated in Ecuador?
No, he's originally was born in Cuba, but he lived a lot of his life in Ecuador.
So they're focusing on the water, because it says the water is, el agua vale más que el oro, vale más que el cobre.
What is
So
this? What is
so
it?
water
It's
values more than gold and more than copper. So
Ah,
the focus is
good.
on water.
It's worth more than
Keep the water pure, yes. So here's a picture of Carlos and the pulpit of this cathedral. And here's this is one of the singers and somebody giving a speech. So Carlos says that we're not enemies of the state. We're not getting in the way of the country's development. We just have a different vision. We've visualized a way of life that has more to do with good living than with development that depends on extraction. So it's basically two visions. One is the old style, is just get more stuff and more money. And the other is having good life. And Carlos said, we've seen the results of mining in Peru, and believe me, they're not pretty. And we've got another vision. So the battle is going on, and at the present it's not any much more than a verbal battle, but there's always danger that it'll get really ugly. And the president is not one who seems willing to compromise at all. And the opponents of the mining project are also not willing to compromise. So, and the opponents have been through this before, and they don't doubt their ability to resist. A few days ago, just I think early this week or the end of last week, I got an email from Carlos saying the government is desperate and getting more aggressive. Things are getting more complicated. And the president of Junín Canton, which is a regional area, is now arrested and illegally in jail. And I'm putting all my efforts focused on trying to get him out. So till this blows over, I can't respond with much. So he's focused on that right at the moment.
When did that happen?
I think it was last Friday. Yeah, at least that's when I heard from Carlos about it. So in the meantime, David Pello and I, the two of the original authors, are going ahead with a new guidebook. And we're putting together the parts that don't depend on Carlos's input. And he'll give us his experience in Ecuador when he can, because of course this guide is going to be international again, so we need to include stuff from all over the world, not just Ecuador. And we want to do this as quickly as we can because of the huge need. Extraction companies, as you all know, I think, are on a rampage around the world, especially in the remote, vulnerable parts of the world. So people really need this material. So that's where I want to invite DJPC to be involved. There's three of us doing this work, and so we have more than a handful with it. There's some, and I'll leave a sheet on the back there, so if anybody thinks they want to be involved, they can put their name down and contact info. But first thoughts on what would help us would be the following. Research, finding mining company tactics and countermeasures that have been used elsewhere in the world, from books or magazine, newspaper articles, the internet, and particularly successes, some opposition tactics that have worked. And secondly, we badly need some help kind of skimming through some material that's in Spanish and giving us some idea of what that material is about and which of those pieces are worth detailed translation. Because, you know, I don't speak Spanish, neither does David. And thirdly, we have a list of anti-mining groups, and we'd love it if somebody could look through the list and poke around and find out which are really effective and which are just writing articles or something. And there's also a list of Spanish anti-mining groups. So, and we don't have a clue as to what they're about. And when we get our first draft finished, we'd love some help reviewing it, commenting on it, telling us what would improve it. And finally, when we're all done, some help with distributing it. In fact, we could use help right now distributing this version, which we found out that some major anti-mining groups don't even know about this guide yet. So the word needs to be spread even more. So
We already have it in Cajamarca and Saladin.
We did send it already.
what's that?
We sent it, the Spanish and the English version, to our info on mining
Good.
list. And also directly to Linda down in
Saladin.
Milton, down in Saladin, Peru.
Uh-huh.
So.
They're good. That should be a real help, yeah.
I hope-
And we want to see groups like that already have those books, you know, and we don't know where else, you know, is the next hotspot too. So I guess in conclusion, all of this tells us that these extraction multinationals can be stopped. And Carlos has proved that. And it just takes a lot of effort and a lot of savvy. And hopefully the new guidebook and this guidebook both can play major roles in that. So that's it. I'm open to any questions.